Hello. Welcome to Kel Revs, the chest of the best, the adventurer's best friend, where you can get everything you want for just your top half off. And tonight, we are talking shop. Hello, everyone. It's Kel Rev, once again back at it to talk about the Magnus Protocol. Tonight, episode 2 of the Magnus Protocol, making adjustments. Thankfully, not as much to talk about with regards to just everything. There's no real, introduction at this point, but we are getting to know the characters just a little teensy bit more. But I gotta say, when it comes to episode 2, I have no idea what the hell is happening. There was a lot going on in episode 2, basically. Well, there wasn't too much that happened. It's just that there were a lot of questions that were made. A lot of blending of certain elements that might be familiar in archives, but feel just slightly bit blurry when it comes to their presence in Protocol. And I have to say, I don't know how important that's going to be in the end, but I do have to say that I have the ever so sneaking suspicion that some of the people that show up in this one may rear their ugly heads once again in the future. The question is, what role could they possibly play? If they do indeed have a role to play in the end, or if maybe they're just serving as a way to keep the horror going while also blending, as I said, elements from archives. But that's for us to get into as we go along. For now, I just want to go ahead and say that the episode was great. It was intriguing. It was different. It was very different. And it kind of sort of didn't add too much to the guesswork involved of what's going on. But it did good to give us a little more on just the nature of Freddy and the nature of just this world in general, and perhaps gives a little bit of insight into what exactly the OIAR is on the lookout for. Now, last time, the first episode, the first shift, appropriately named, gave us a little insight into the characters. As opposed to how it begins in archives, we were able to meet the full staff of the Office of Incident Assessment and Response. Whereas in archives, it was solely just from John's point of view, with the rest of the cast eventually coming up and being recorded and having their voice appear and their characters interact with the overarching plot. In this case, it seems that all of that playing around and acting like this isn't going to be some large, established, overarching plot line, it's well established already. I mean, that's just the expectation at this point. But now we're finally starting to see a normal workday. There's not too much introductions going on, but that's not to say that new information isn't there, or the threads to be followed are there. But the problem with threads, especially in a story such as the Magnus Protocol or archives, is that threads can lead to just a myriad of possibilities, consequences unseen, perfectly in character, especially where entities such as the web are involved, but again, it's only the second episode. And what happens in the first episode? Well, not much, really. The first scene opens up with Gwen and Sam actually practicing recalling the binder. Gwen, having been there for a prolonged period of time, seems to have, for the most part, kind of sort of memorized the binder, but it's not exactly perfect. Sam suggests, for example, certain keywords, with that being a prompt for Gwen to go off of, and eventually, and hopefully pin down whichever thing it shows up in the binder. For example, Sam suggests Dracula, and then Gwen is just oh, okay, is it going to be V for vampires, subsection popular culture? And then she guesses the number, but it's no dice. Sam says that she was off by a single digit. They repeat the process with Frankenstein. She suggests resurrection, subsections, obsession, medical, pursuit, maybe blasphemy. And she guesses again, but she gets the number wrong. And it really just goes to show that this is a really thick binder. Like, that was already established last time when they were just, like, trying to walk Sam through the entire process, but they were just talking about how thick the binder is. Gwen's been here for years, and yet she still doesn't remember all the classifications. There's that many subsections and subclassifications in the binder. And even though Gwen is very clearly a thorough person, a no-nonsense hard worker, who values quality over quantity when it comes to work, she doesn't have the binder memorized. She gets the digits wrong. Sure, one digit off compared to however many are in that binder, but still, she still doesn't have it. And she's trying to. Well, first of all, we get to see that she really is something of a tryhard. Not hating. But now we know for a fact that she really, really puts her effort into this. But maybe Lena is correct when she said that maybe her ambition is just ever so slightly misplaced. And really, memorizing the binder doesn't seem like it's going to be the thing that gets her up the corporate ladder in the first place. And a part of me has to wonder if the complications of the case files is intentional, but not in the sense of organizational purposes, but for disorganizational purposes. If that's a word. It's a word. We'll call it a word. But it's around this point in time, once that Alice arrives and the rest of them get to work properly. And that's when the incident report properly begins. Now, this incident was not dictated by Freddy. There was no Chester, there was no Norris. We didn't get to hear Augustus at this point in time just yet. Instead, what we get is a video call. Well, half of it is a video call. One character by the name of Daria apparently has their camera off for this video call, but their counterpart, a therapist. Wow, Freddy, I didn't realize we were going to just access something so intimately private as a therapy session, but hey, I don't make the rules. But yes, Freddy starts playing a video call, a video therapy session between Daria and her therapist. Now, the therapist opens with concerns regarding the paperwork they've received and Daria's refusal to use her video camera, but Daria doesn't really care exactly. They just want to get it over with. And the therapy session, that's not exactly the kind of attitude that you should have for a therapy session, but because this particular session is revealed to be court-ordered, the therapist is very understanding of that kind of attitude. And it's from that point on that we get a glimpse into what exactly happened to Daria and how she ended up needing, desperately, a therapy session. Especially a court-ordered therapy session. Daria basically goes into detail about how she had a very severe case of body dysmorphia throughout the entirety of her life, which is already a pretty rough thing to have to go through, but she's also a visual artist and and gets a lot of her work from social media commissions. And because of that, she is constantly on social media and Instagram and things like that all the time. And basically just sort of exposed to, like, we know how this works, right? We hear the studies all the time, IRL, about how social media can just devastate perceptions of yourself, your self-esteem, your self-confidence. And you're seeing all these filters and all these glamorous looks of people and being like, I should be looking like that. And that's basically what Daria was dealing with. And at a point in her life, she says when she reached 30, she decided she was gonna try to do something different. She started to change the way she dressed, changed her style, changed how she was going to present herself, because she was unhappy with how she looked like, but she realized that she needed to do something more. She wanted something more bombastic, and the thing that she decided on was to get a tattoo. But she didn't have an idea of how she was going to go about it. Rather, instead, she kind of sort of stumbled on a bit of inspiration. Or rather, she stumbled on the person who would take inspiration and give her that look that she so desperately desired. A tattoo artist by the name of Ink Soul. Soul being spelled with a 5 for the S. Apparently, by that point in time in the story, at that point in the year, hang on, what year would that be actually? Hang on, I need to review my paperwork, my analysis, my corkboard of conspiracy theories. Well, either way, by the time of her being in this therapy session, Inksoul had apparently been blown up as a tattoo artist in the online space. But that didn't seem to be the case when Daria first approached them. And in fact, the only way that they found them in the first place was because they were looking for symbols as a reference for a commission themselves. Eventually, after finding Inksoul, she realized that she liked their work, she liked what Inksoul was putting out, and decided that she would get a tattoo from them. So, she applied via their online website, it seems, and immediately was invited to their London studio. Now, when they first arrived, nothing seems to really stand out to them with regards to Inksoul. All they really say is that it gave off quote-unquote influencer vibes at the studio. She noted that there were more ring lights and photography gear rather than tattoo gear. And she just heard like very loud dubstep music from down the hall of the studio. And when she went in, she notes that Inksoul didn't have anything that really made them stand out. For all intents and purposes, it seems like they're very nondescript in their physical presentation, with the sole exception of a tattoo that they have, which was a floral serpent design running up their arm and into their neck, so vivid it looked ready to slither off their skin and onto the chair. That was a quote, sorry. I don't think I started out by saying that was a quote, but yes. That's the only thing that stood out about them. Nothing particularly stands out to me on that front, but the fact that they don't stand out, that they're very nondescript, one can't help but have just the slightest inkling that sorry. I just got onto that. Inkling that there are specific entities and forces at work in regards to Inksoul's work, but slow down. We'll slow down on that front. Now, as Daria interacts with Inksoul, they just don't talk about anything regarding the tattoo. Inksoul never asks about the design Daria wants. Instead, they ask about her life, why she wants the ink. And nothing seems to catch their attention until she mentions that she's an artist, at which point Inksoul suddenly exclaims, very excitedly, quote, "The artist becomes the canvas." Ooh. Immediately, they start like fiddling with some buttons, press a button, and suddenly they're streaming. They're suddenly full-on influencer moment and start streaming the tattoo process. And they just sort of, strap her down and start making the tattoo. Didn't say anything about the design, just starts inking. Right? I don't have a tattoo, so I don't know if there's terminology and if I'm using it wrong. I don't think so. It should be fairly straightforward, but yes, they start going along with the tattoo, and Daria just goes into, from that point on, she just goes into very vivid description of just how painful the process is. She passes out in fact, and wakes up with the tattoo finished and Inksol cleaning their tools. Apparently, the design that she ended up with was a paintbrush design covering the inner elbow, the inner forearm, and ending just at the inside of her palm. She describes it as having floral patterns entwined with symbols she didn't recognize. Glittering symbols, in fact. As soon as she looked at the tattoo, the lights, they get turned out, and she is shuffled out the exit with no aftercare and shoved off home without giving any opportunity to really ask questions. When she gets home, the tattoo still hurts. But she notes that it feels like looking at it, it feels like it's been there for a long time. Like it looks like it's been there for a long time. And when she looks in the mirror, she realizes she likes how she looks now. Like she is so much more confident in herself, and she sees her reflection and sees someone interesting. She sees someone that people want to know, want to be friends with, or more, right? She sees someone to be admired, and for the first time in her life, she felt compelled to do a self-portrait, which is what she does. Immediately, despite the pain in her arm, she starts painting. She pulls out the canvas, she pulls out the brushes and the oil, and she starts painting all throughout the night. She just keeps painting, and she keeps going, and she keeps going, until eventually she creates a mirror image of herself on canvas. And she feels intensely proud of it. She sees herself perfectly written, painted on the canvas after, including the tattoo, everything. It's a one-to-one reflection of who she is as a person. And then she passes out. She passes out until 4 p.m. the next day, and when she wakes up, she sees her face, she stares at the self-portrait, and she admires it. She admires how accurate her work is. But she decides that it's not perfect. Sure, it's accurate, but it's not the level of perfect that she wishes it could be. So, she starts fixing it. She ignores all her bodily needs, and she starts working on painting the canvas one more time. Is what I say. But I feel like it's kind of sort of vague the way she describes it, because it sounds like she is only working on the canvas, but the way she describes everything that happens afterwards makes it kind of sort of hard to tell. Because what she uses is she starts using the palette knife, right, to make adjustments. And she says to the therapist that she knows it starts working when she feels like she's scraping bone. So what she ends up doing is she ends up making a small little adjustment around the eyes. After she fixes it, she goes to the bathroom and looks in the mirror, and she sees that the changes have been made. The little tiny adjustment she was trying to do was made. And she thinks to herself, hey, this is perfect. This is good. This is good. This is what I wanted. But then she looks at her reflection again. She looks over her reflection again, and she thinks to herself, it's still not perfect. And you can basically see where exactly this is gonna go. She goes into vivid detail describing just the entire process that she goes through to fix herself and make her perfect. She would widen her hips, right? Set her eyes just further apart. She would make her chest a little more protrudent, I guess. And just do a bunch of other quote-unquote adjustments to herself. And of course, the adjustments would be reflected onto her. However, she made a point of trying to avoid the tattoo, because in her mind, the tattoo is the only thing about her that is perfect. Thing is, as she continues to make adjustments, she notices that the tattoo is actually spreading up her arm and filling in the spaces that she makes. So what ends up happening is that not only is she trying so hard to make herself perfect, she has to make adjustments that work around the tattoo because it's the only thing that's perfect. So what ends up happening is she makes every perfection she makes, like 10 more imperfections appear, and the tattoo spreads, making her work around it even more. And she spends days doing this. It isn't until her housemate returns that she is forced to stop. But at that point in time, she was actually working on her mouth and was unable to speak as a result. And whatever her housemate Sarah saw, it was apparently so freaking terrifying that she couldn't. Basically, she reacted on instinct, essentially. Daria tries to get her to calm down, but she can't speak, and she can't hold things either because she was also working on her hands as well. And in the end, this housemate ends up punching her in the face, and in Daria's own mind, ruins the days of work that she has spent trying to make herself perfect. And then that's basically the end of the incident at that point. Sarah apparently told the ambulance that she believed Daria had tried to, erase herself, if you will, with acid. But Daria is just keen on needing people to believe her. She was placed on self-erasure watch and only got released recently on the stipulation that she get counseling. And since then, she hasn't made any adjustments ever since. She is, quote unquote, waiting for inspiration. Hence why she is apparently not keen on showing her face in the video call. The therapist, of course, is speechless, doesn't say whether she believes or disbelieves Daria, but she does ask if Daria did try to harm herself with acid, which Daria denies, but she says that she just wanted to make herself better, and that if she wanted to clear the canvas, she would have used turpentine instead. A very blasé thing to add, I would say. I don't know if blasé is the word to describe it, but yeah, and for those who don't know, it's okay, I didn't know either, but apparently turpentine is something of a paint solvent, and the way it works apparently is that it makes paint much more the opposite of viscous. You know, it thins it out, I suppose, is the word that I'm looking for. If I recall, if my notes are to be believed. I hope I wrote that down correctly. I'm not an artist, in case that wasn't clear. But yeah, it's at that point that the incident is taken care of. Sam categorizes the case, he files it away. But he's basically kind of sort of shaken, I guess. This isn't the second, case that he has had to file. It's not the second incident he's had to read or see. He's already been working here for a couple of days at this point in time. I believe, hang on, where are my notes here? as this is the second episode, it takes place on... Nope, no it doesn't. Hang on, let me do a quick little checkup here and see. It's nice because compared to archives, we get a much more firmer measure of the timeline because the case files, the episodes themselves, are actually labeled with the case and the instant as it is filed and like assessed, which is wonderful for people like me who may or may not be over analyzing every little tiny thing that happens in it, right? Let's see here. So the first episode of Magnus Protocol occurs, I believe, hang on, I shouldn't have to believe it, within in-universe. It occurs on, let's see, Cat 1 RBC 5257-1205-2022-0901-2024. Okay, so the first episode occurs on January 9th, 2024, with episode 2 occurring on 1801-2024. So January 18th, 2024. So it occurs 9 days later. So it's not like this is the second case that Sam has filed, but he's deeply shaken by this one, apparently. Maybe it's like maybe he hasn't been getting a lot of talkers lately. Who's to say? Who knows? But he does ask Alice how any of them in the office are even able to cope with the weird stuff and not be bothered by it. Which Alice says she just stops paying attention, essentially. She just skims for keywords, works on other stuff if she gets a talker, and just goes about her business. As far as she's concerned, they're just words on a screen. You know, there's no real meat behind them. There's no real meaning behind them. As far as she's concerned, it's just all part of the job. And it's best to just compartmentalize and treat each case as just something that happens, something they file, and then something they forget about once they go home. It doesn't matter if they think something is true or not, or if they have reason to believe it's true or not. It's not what they're paid to do. And that's the advice that you give Sam. Which, you know, in, I guess, the flesh life, right? One has to kind of sort of like compartmentalize. Yeah, it's good to keep work in one space, home life in another space. It's good to have a third space as well for friends, family, and the like, but it's definitely good to keep all that stuff separate. But, no, one has to wonder whether or not it's going to stay separate. That scene ends, and we go ahead and cut over to Gwen and Alice, who are in the break room making conversation. When Gwen says that she thinks that Lena is planning to outsource their work, that she overheard Lena talking about expanding external operations, whatever that means. Which raises a lot of flags, but we can always get to that in a second. Alice doesn't really think that that's something that's possible. She thinks it's unlikely. They're civil servants. It would take years for that kind of thing to just sort of happen. The paperwork would take a while. There's too much bureaucracy that could make that even feasible or happen within the course of a couple of weeks, months, or within the year. So she brushes it off, but hey, you know what they say. It's a Chekhov's conversation. Obviously, it's going to come back up later, but we're not getting anything in this episode. At that point, we cut back over to Alice once again. Alice gets a phone call. It's from her brother, it seems. A character by the name of Luke. Apparently, he's a musician with a band called Dredgerman. No real nothing really substantial seems to occur in their conversation, although she does say that they need to wait for like payday, right? Which apparently is the 28th of January, which sets that as 10 days away if this is occurring on the 18th. So, we don't know what needs to be paid for on 28th. I kind of just sort of assume that I don't know, she's going to meet up with her brother for dinner or something. I know I've been in that position before many times where it's just like, hey guys, we can go out, but we gotta wait until after payday, otherwise, like, I'm not gonna be able to cover it. And I'm not gonna let you guys cover it either. But I don't know. I don't know. I'm on high alert, as you can tell. And every little thing seems to be the kernel for something else. Like, why include that detail? But again, not something we can really jump on and like assess in the early stages of the series. However, we can at least keep it in mind. Who knows? The detail might be important later. It might not. Maybe we'll have to toss it out. Maybe we'll toss it out. I'll forget about it, and it will be important later. Much like many things in my life. See, this is what happens when you don't know what's important. But the gamer lifestyle, at least, is stepping in and being like, hey, we might need this later. we might need this later. But that's besides the point. For now, the best thing we can do is try to figure out what the heck is going on in this episode, what the heck happened in this incident. If we can't really analyze the things that go on in the office, but we can ask questions. But first, maybe we should look at the incident itself. All right. First of all, the mere fact that this episode locked in on a video conference really goes to show that it's not limited. I mean, yeah, sure, the therapy session is court ordered, so maybe it makes sense that a government entity and government programs such as Freddy would have access to that. Maybe, but that doesn't change the fact that it has access to that in the first place. We really get to see that Freddy has like just a wide variety of things that it can pull from the internet and have our characters analyze and assess. Doesn't really mean anything, but it really does kind of show that it is, if not a very, very handy tool for the eye of beholding, it is still a very, very creepy tool that the government just has in its back pocket. Somewhere underneath a government building where the sun don't shine. At the hands of everyday civil service workers. Why? Right? Just why? Hard to really pick apart, I suppose. At which point, now we should go ahead and have a nice little look-see-doodle at that. So, something that Alice brought up in the last episode is that when they get talkers, there's nothing they can really do, right? When Chester or Norris or Augustus are reading incidents. Those are separate. Those are different things. When they're dictating these incidents, there's nothing they can do. Apparently they can maybe stop them, maybe, but there's no moving on to another incident unless that one finishes. So does that apply to video conferences as well? Like, is that not something that you can just sort of like pause and move on? I feel like this is like a question that doesn't even need to be asked because it might be just a little irrelevant. Systematically, it makes sense that they can't really do anything. It's not exactly transcribed. They can't really Control F key terms and then just be like, okay, that's what's going on. It's not something that they can skim, but can they not like YouTube 2x speed it? Can they not pause it? Can they really not go forward with it? I don't know. It just seems like an interesting choice that they would also have that. It makes me wonder if they can skip it or if they can't. Does that mean I assume every incident is real, in the same sense that every statement from archives is real, regardless of how ridiculous it sounds or its presentation. So I'm assuming that any incident that is like recorded and put into an episode is going to be real. That's fine. I'm just wondering if the videos are in any way sort of special. I highly suspect that there's going to be some sort of pattern with regards to which voice Freddy uses to dictate an incident. I'm fairly confident that that's what's going to happen. For reasons that I won't get into right now. Not yet. As we get into further episodes, I will be able to present just slightly more evidence in that regard. But for now, cards close to my table. Play the stranger. Play the play the spiral in this sort of situation. But it's something that I highly... Not even just me. I'm fairly certain I've seen a couple of comments under the videos themselves where people are just like, yeah, no, there's definitely a pattern there. I try not to look at the comments, A, not spoil myself, and B, I don't want to accidentally take someone else's argument and like present it as my own when it's really not. But odds are, I'm fairly certain everyone thinks that there is a pattern behind which incidents get dictated by who. But then what about the videos? Like, is it just the videos are already being like voiced, so there's no point? Is it just to sort of like demonstrate how widespread and how Freddy seems to have its digital fingers in every internet pie? If it is, that's pretty dang clever. I don't know, it just kind of sort of like gives me a little more insight into the kinds of like implications that you can make when it comes to writing. I suspect that it's probably a real incident, and I suspect that any incident that isn't dictated and is instead in video format will maybe just kind of sort of won't have a pattern. It'll be like the miscellaneous folder of Protocol, essentially, is what I'm saying. Like, this folder is going to be Chester incidents, this folder is going to be Norris incidents, this folder is going to be Augustus incidents, and then everything else is just kind of shunted off to the side into the miscellaneous, where it'll probably be like a video call, a recorded phone call, or maybe like a transcribed something or other. Who knows? That is my expectation. But ultimately, I feel like it's not really something that really matters just yet. But yeah, so that's just something I thought to point out. Now, getting into the incident itself. Daria. She has issues with self-image, right? So it leads me to question a couple of things. Because here's the thing. Daria, without question, is a victim, right? She is a victim in this situation. Usually, those who report statements are victims with the misfortune or fortune, depending on your way of looking at it, of surviving whatever horrific incident they have been through. In this situation, in this incident, there are certain themes that are present in archives, that are present here, that make me question what exactly is at play here. Now, Daria, as we said, has very bad body dysmorphia, has issues with her self-image. This is an aspect and characteristic of an entity from archives known as the Flesh. Now, the Flesh is interesting entity. Basically, it is the primordial fear of being eaten, essentially. At least that's how it was categorized. It was the primordial fear of being eaten. It's the primordial fear that you're just meat to be broken down, digested, just a whole lot of things regarding the body specifically, and what can be done to it, and what it could go through, and the fact that it is transient, right? And very easy to just sort of shuffle off. But one of the not so touched upon aspects of it that were only briefly mentioned through certain statements that I apparently didn't think to write here is that it can also relate to aspects of body image, you know? In this case, what's going on here? There have been plenty of times in Magnus Archives where a character felt like their body needed to undergo a change, right? And they felt in deep-seated insecurity and sought out help, which unfortunately for them took the shape of an avatar of the flesh who would end up reshaping them, taking aspects of their body and shaping them into something else, something quote-unquote ideal. I think at some point even the word perfect was used. So it makes me wonder if that is what is at play here, right? Is it the flesh acting in this episode? Because it feels like that is what's being preyed upon, Daria's insecurity. But that's not... Insecurity isn't the same as, you know, fear, right? The instigator in this, Daria is definitely like a victim here. That goes without saying. But Inksol, the tattoo artist, is the instigator of this, is the one that in some way kind of sort of like preys on that insecurity. They could be an avatar of the flesh. It feels like the most likely culprit, especially with the self-image, the body dysmorphia. It's similar to what a character named Jared in Archives did. Jared was an avatar of the flesh, but at some point he started focusing on body dysmorphia. He started a gym in his domain when the world undergoes the change, essentially. His domain ends up manifesting as him growing people into their ideal forms while feeding on their insecurities. But it doesn't feel the same here. Because when Jared feeds on their insecurities, they're all suffering. They're all feeling things, their bodies changing and growing and becoming foreign and bizarre and gross and visceral and disgusting. That's not what happens here, though. Daria doesn't become afraid throughout the entire... Sure, she gets uncomfortable. She gets off-balanced during the entire interaction with Inksol. But, like, the entire time, he's not trying to make her uncomfortable, per se, right? We don't know what they look like. Which is also kind of sort of bizarre, because characters that are described as being nondescript, they usually end up being associated with a stranger, but it doesn't feel like that's what's going on. It could be, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Inksol doesn't seem to be preying on fear here. They start talking with Daria. They start asking about, like, Daria's life, what she does, why she wants the tattoo in the first place. And then when they finally get an answer, they get super excited. They start streaming this for everyone to see, and suddenly it becomes just perfectly like a viewable thing. Which also, why has that not appeared in Freddy's like database? It feels like it should happen, but I might have a good reason to think why that's not happening. But they start streaming it. And then they give Daria the tattoo. The tattoo ends up clearly having powers in and of itself. Something has happened. And Inksol has made it so that Daria, possibly through the power of the tattoo, possibly through the power of whatever symbols that they etched into the tattoo itself, gives Daria the ability to shape her body. It gives her the ability to make the adjustments, and then as a result the tattoo ends up growing, almost as if it's feeding on this change as it occurs. Maybe it is feeding off of the insecurity, but at the end, the thing that gets me, right, is at the end, when the therapist asks Daria, did you try to erase yourself, right, with acid? And Daria says no, she just wanted to be better. And she says, if I wanted to clear the canvas, I would have used turpentine. So it wasn't out of the possibility. It's so blasé. It's so unconcerned. It's so disconnected. Even when her housemate punched her in the face, she looks at it in the therapy session, both in the moment then and during the therapy session, as a betrayal that ruined her days of hard work. It feels like Daria kind of sort of removes herself from humanity in some way. It feels like Daria, in that moment, has become something else that isn't human anymore. It feels like she has become an avatar. Maybe not an avatar in the truest sense, but the first thing that happens when someone finally sees her after she gets the tattoo and she's made adjustments is they're terrified. They are absolutely terrified by what they see. Makes sense. They aren't looking at something that is apparently the normal shape of a human anymore. And Daria doesn't care about that aspect. She doesn't care that she's scared someone with what the adjustments that she's made to herself. She's mad that the adjustments she has made for herself were ruined. And that she hasn't felt inspiration to make adjustments ever again. It just feels like Daria has become something else. What? I'm not entirely sure. I feel like she has become an avatar, but I don't know if she has become an avatar of the flesh, just by virtue of like her messing up her body to the point of horrifying someone who sees her, or if she has become an avatar of the stranger. There are shades of it. There, she is human, but she doesn't look human anymore. Her body is something that she can mold and shape into different things, which has occurred. There are many times in archives where the stranger, the fear of the unknown, utilizes art as a medium to reflect its uncanny nature. Using mannequins, it has appeared in instances where someone was looking to paint something, right? Music, art as a medium has been one of the things that has been synonymous with the stranger, and admittedly with the spiral as well, but definitely with the stranger. And in this case, it's hard. It's hard to tell. And I guess that makes sense, you know, by the end of Archives, you start to blur the line between the entities, and that's one of the key things that ends up being very, very important in the final season. And the episodes leading up to it, and the episodes concluding the series as a whole. And so, my question is... No, not my question is... I have no doubt at this point that she becomes an avatar. I have no doubt that maybe she is acting now, right? And doing other kinds of funny business out in the world. And I fully expect it to be actively hostile, actively feeding whatever entity that she has ended up connected to as a result of her interaction with Inksol. My question is, Inksol, what is Inksol doing? Because the way it feels, they have shades of like Angela, who is a possible avatar of the flesh from Magnus Archives episode 14, Piecemeal. Angela's whole thing was that if you wanted to undo someone, right? She is someone that you could go to, and what she would do is basically something. She would do something. No idea what, but she would do something, and if the target of your hatred would slowly, ever so slowly, experience horrific accidents throughout the entirety of their life that take away bits and pieces of their body. So it feels kind of sort of like that, where there's just a random person, a random bystander, I guess, that interacts with a normal human being that results in some horrific change. But the thing is, in that instance, Angela has victims. Unquestionably, victims who are experiencing the loss of their flesh and the necessary fear that comes along with it. Inksol isn't doing that. Inksol turned Daria into not just a thing of fear, but someone capable of generating fear as well. Is Inksol trying to make avatars? Like, for what purpose though, right? The answer should be fairly obvious, which is to generate more and more fear and eventually conduct a ritual which would ideally pull one of the entities into reality. The question, of course, still remains, who is active here? Is Inksol working on both ends, though? Do they realize that they are working on both ends? Because they are nondescript in their description, with the sole exception of their tattoo, which is, in some regards, very minor, but it is a characteristic of the stranger. They are preying on body dysmorphia. That is an aspect of the flesh. It's those two things immediately that come together in Daria, which inspires fear in her housemate, and could potentially inspire fear in other people as well. If that is the case, if it is blending, they're an inhuman monster at this point, we might as well call them an it. If Inksol is blending the fears, right, in the hopes of generating that fear, does that mean other avatars are doing the same thing? Are they also kind of sort of like capitalizing on the effectiveness of a blended, blurred fear? First of all, I had never thought to consider the combination that could be the flesh and the stranger. And it feels very intuitive now that I think about it, but I never thought to blend it in the way that they have here. But if they are blending it, are there other avatars that are blending the fears the same way that Inksol is? And are they trying to make more avatars as they go along? Because I feel like in Archives, they never really get into how avatars end up gathering together. They do explore that with the Desolation, which is, the fear of violence and loss of comfort and safety, and pain. They do explore that via the Church of the Lightless Flame. They do explore that with the Dark and the People's Church of the Divine Host. Was it Cult of the Lightless Flame? And then People's Church of the Divine Host? Hard to say. I can't recall, unfortunately. They kind of sort of explore it with the Lucases and the Lonely. The Fairchilds, technically. But, the Fairchilds just stole that name. So it's never been explored per se how the avatar making process could be. It just, no one ever seems to really try to make an avatar per se. Sure, there are attempts, but no one tries to grab some rando off the street and be like, hey, why don't you join us? The Stranger does it, I guess, yeah, but technically they don't. They just straight up take people, kill them, and then use their bodies as a vessel for something else. Very on brand and in character for the Stranger, but, the only instance of someone being molded into an avatar kind of sort of is just completely, spoiler alert, focused entirely just on the Magnus Institute itself. So I guess it's nice to look at this episode as showing someone actively making avatars. Or making monsters. I mean, Jared also made monsters in Archives as well. So whether they're making avatars or making monsters, I guess, is besides the point. Point is, the Fears are currently making things. Again, actively, in this world. Likely for the exact same purpose. Maybe. It's a good assumption. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that that's what they're doing. But it doesn't answer... It still leaves the question of whether the blending of the Fears is still on the table here, and if it's being acknowledged by those. Because one has to wonder why an avatar of blended fear like that didn't really exist in Archives. Sure, there were avatars that didn't go with the same direction as others. Jared, despite being an avatar of the flesh, when he was called upon by other avatars of the flesh to perform the ritual to pull the flesh into the real world, he didn't go with them. Yet, granted, he said that he was just satisfied doing what he always does, going around taking people's body parts and then putting them into himself. But maybe that's just the aspect of an avatar that is not fully aligned with a specific fear. So what happens if an avatar of multiple fears starts trying to propagate? It's a horrifying thought. But considering the situation, considering the fact that Ink Soul is apparently still very popular on social media, still active, apparently, then I guess time will tell and we'll get to see. I fully expect that we'll see them again, but I don't think we'll be seeing them through Freddy, because it wouldn't be too weird, I guess, if Ink Soul, as an avatar of some entity, was somehow keeping their space safe from the effects of the eye. But then again, what if, this kind of sort of goes back to my idea of this not really being a stronghold of the eye per se. What if the reason the Freddy isn't looking into it is because the eye isn't really looking for it? What if the reason that we're listening in on all of this is because this not stronghold of the eye is instead a target of the eye? I don't have much in the way of evidence to support this hypothesis just yet. I'm fairly certain as the episodes go along and as I look over my notes, I will have a little more to back that up. But for now, it's just a theory. It's not just a theory. It's a hypothesis with very, very little in the way of evidence to fully support it. But it's something that catches my attention, to be sure. Another thing that seems to catch my attention, which also kind of sort of, maybe it supports that hypothesis, maybe it stands against it, or maybe it's just fully separate from it. But something that I haven't mentioned up to this point is that at the end of the episode, Alice notes that Sam has written a memo note with the words Magnus Institute on it. And she realizes that Sam is taking his work home with him, apparently, and has apparently let something about this, something about the case, specifically the Magnus Institute, has stuck with him. And she tells him he needs to drop it, he needs to forget about it, and he needs to not think about it. He needs to deprogram after work and not think about it afterwards. It's Magnus. It's Magnus. It's a horror podcast. This is a maybe not stronghold of the eye. Sam's not gonna drop it. Sam's not gonna drop it. There is very clearly a hungering curiosity in that man. And I'm scared for him. I worry for him. It wouldn't be the first time a meek gentleman in this universe got messed up as a result of their idle curiosity. But there's no stopping him at this point. He's clearly we're going to end up seeing more and more of Sam and his findings. The question is when, how often, and what exactly he is going to end up finding in the end. And I sincerely hope that whatever happens, and I doubt that this is where it's going to go, but still, I want to go ahead and express my hope. I sincerely hope that wherever Sam goes in his little journey for whatever truth that he's looking for, I sincerely hope that it doesn't involve a blending of the avatars, a blending of the entities in him. I sincerely hope that whatever Inksoul is doing, it doesn't get to Sam and turn him into something that he will regret. I'm sure he's going to make a number of mistakes as the series progresses, but I sincerely hope, take a shot every single time I've said that today, I just don't want him to end up less, or I guess more than human. At least by the end of the season. It's... Yeah. There's a lot going on here. There's so many questions. There's so many things to consider. We're only 2 episodes in, and already I'm just sort of sat here thinking about all this stuff. What the heck is the Office of Incident Assessment and Response? What is external relations or external operations, right? What is Lena planning on doing? Is that the response department? Is that the response part of the OIAR? Which, by the way, I think I forgot to mention this in the last episode, but when Alice mentions that she thinks that the response department doesn't really exist anymore, it's at a point where Sam is filling out onboarding paperwork for the office, and he eventually gets a portion of it that is related to the response, labeled response 1-1. Alice says he doesn't need to like fill out that paperwork, but he checks the box anyway because I guess he's just curious about what it's going to do. Again, Sam, I'm scared for you. That hungry curiosity isn't a good sign in a world such as this. But he checks it anyway, and time will tell whether or not that is going to cause issues. Maybe that prompted the expanding of external operations that Lena was talking about. I highly doubt that she is quote-unquote outsourcing their work. It sounds very menial. It sounds very depressing. And the turnover, right, apparently is already pretty high for this job, right? And there's more to it. I didn't talk about this last episode. The trailer for the Magnus Protocol. The trailer for the Magnus Protocol is actually Sam's interview for the job. And in that interview, again, it's being recorded by Freddy, probably Freddy, right? And in it, Sam walks into the office, Lena greets him, talks about his qualifications, and that he seems like a very bright personality, a very sociable person. And she tells him, Sam, do not take this job. She says to his face in the trailer, do not take this job. And Sam wonders why, right? Genre savviness aside, you know, he needs the job. He says he needs the job and that he wants the job. But Lena doesn't say anything particularly spooky. She just says that the job is very menial. It's long hours. They work nights. And the nature of their job is very rough on the mental psyche of those who do it. She says that a personality such as his doesn't belong in that office. But Sam says he needs this job and he can handle it. So Lena asks him, what is the worst thing you've ever seen? She throws out a couple of suggestions. She throws out, like, maybe you saw a friend or family die. Maybe you witnessed a horrible accident. And of course, this is all via audio, but Sam doesn't answer. Sam goes quiet. And it's at that point that Lena starts to, like, lean in. And she starts asking, maybe you saw something different. Maybe you saw something worse. Maybe Sam saw something that he couldn't tell anyone because it was so bizarre and otherworldly that no one would believe him. And Sam just says, yes. I might be misremembering what exactly he says, but he basically, in a very soft, quiet, and not submissive tone, just a very quiet tone, says that he has seen something. And it's at that point that Lena says nothing, leans back into her chair, back to business as usual, and says, very well, you've got the job. So, Lena obviously knows some spooky stuff is going on. Obviously, she knows more about the system than she's letting on, and it sucks that she's not explaining it to poor Colin, the IT manager, but hey, need to know basis, I suppose. But then, what is expanding external operations, right? This is very clearly a job that she wouldn't just hand off to other people. It's gotta be someone that I guess she knows can at least do the job. Someone that I guess interests her. Maybe interests her? There's no really sufficient or conclusive way to figure out what her standards are, per se, other than loyalty and capability, right? And ability. There's no real way to know. So the odds of her just like outsourcing their work, even taking into account what Alice has said about like the bureaucracy that would make the process take years, becomes unreasonable. You know, I mean, obviously we weren't going to entertain that she was going to outsource it, but then what is expanding external operations? What is the response department of the OIAR doing? Who are they? Where are they? Is Sam going to end up being a part of that just by sheer virtue of checking the wrong box on his paperwork? Does that involve in some way, shape, or form the Institute, right? Is this a case of are they hunting avatars, for example? Because it feels like every incident. 3 of the incidents so far have involved an individual being present within that area. There hasn't been like a warping of space. Someone isn't like transported to another dimension, which has happened on multiple occasions. It happens with the buried with the coffin. It happens in any case involving the vast. Happens many times when involving the lonely. It happens in so many cases of them just being transported to another dimension, possibly an actual space occupied by the entity itself. But so far, these 3 incidents have involved an individual. The first one involved someone, quote unquote, named Arthur, right? Or some of Arthur. The second involved whatever is in the Magnus Institute, and this time it involved what could possibly be an avatar of the flesh, Inksoul. Are they hunting down avatars? In which case, that means, at the very least, we're the good guys? Maybe? Question mark? And it might explain why they need to expand external operations, because I could very, very well easily believe that there's a high turnover rate for the response department, and I'm not talking about people finding a better job elsewhere. And if no one's believing it, then that means they're keeping it under wraps, hush hush, right? So does that mean that they're going to put Sam on the external operations? I don't think so. I don't know. I'm inclined to believe that maybe they are hunting down avatars. It would explain, well, not too much actually. It would explain expanding external operations. It would put a purpose to the department itself and a purpose behind the response part. It would have a response department in the first place. But again, there's no way to tell this early. For now, though, I will go ahead and put my hat in the ring and say that they are hunting down avatars. They are probably disrupting rituals. I guess my expectation right now, my prediction at this point in time, is that the OIAR is doing what Gertrude did, but on a greater scale, at a much more professional and government-sanctioned level. And now they are under surveillance and possibly attack for it, just by virtue of Freddy seemingly taking a very vested interest in what's going on in the office. Though notably, it's not getting all the information. We're only getting what the civil service workers are doing in the background. We're not getting what Lena is doing, which means that whatever it is that's listening in, if it's Freddy, then that means there is a blind spot somewhere in its programming, in its access, because we're not getting anything out of Lena. We get some stuff out of Lena, but that's only when she's interacting with the others. Thus far, it seems to only be when she's interacting with the others. But that's it. Which leads to further evidence that this isn't a stronghold of the Eye. Or who knows, maybe Lena is the one that's listening in and has control over that, and she's just sort of keeping things for her records. Hard to say. But that's where we're at with episode 2 of the Magnus Protocol. Whew. Turns out I had a lot more to say about it than I thought. Some of that is actually off from, like, not from my notes. It's just like, as I talked more and more about it, I was just like, wait, no, maybe there's this, maybe there's that. Ooh, there's more going on there. So much scary business. So many, just, yeah. But with that, I think I've exhausted everything I have to say with regards to episode 2 of the Magnus Protocol, making adjustments. Thank you guys so much for listening in on that, listening to me yap, listening to me ramble and go off in what I thought was going to be more organized compared to last episode, but maybe only by a marginally small amount in that regard. But with that, we're going to go ahead and call it for that episode. Thank you guys so much for popping in, hanging out, and being your beautiful selves. We are going to continue this conversation. Well, not this conversation specifically, but we are going to talk about episode 3 on the next episode, which will be tomorrow, April 2nd, 2024, 7 p.m. JST. Look forward to that. I believe, I don't remember if that was a particularly game-changing episode based on my memories of it, but I promise you that I have just as many notes, if not more. But hopefully those notes end up being just a little bit more organized, and who knows, maybe some questions are going to get asked. But if you haven't caught up to the podcast, I highly recommend you do so. I'm talking about the Magnus Protocol, by the way, not here. Hi, this is only the second episode of this, but I highly recommend that you listen to it if you aren't already. But that's the situation. As for any other announcements, none whatsoever. As I mentioned before, we're going to be talking about the Magnus Protocol up until episode 10, which is at which point we'll be fully caught up. So we're going to be talking about this for another week and a little bit of next week as well. So look forward to that. Last but certainly not least, tonight, after the podcast, I will be posting a small little trailer about a neat little merch drop. Ooh, yeah, that's right. I've been thinking about merch for a good long while, and it's high time I revealed some of the inner workings of my nonsensical, jokestery, disorganized mind. So I'll be posting that immediately. Maybe not immediately, but soon after I end the podcast and the stream. So be on the lookout for that. If you aren't already, feel free to join the Discord, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Twitch, subscribe to my YouTube. There, I did all the spiel. I did all the things that you are supposed to do. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for popping in, hanging out, and being your beautiful selves. I hope to see you guys, catch you guys again. In the meantime, though, shop's closed. Get out. Bye-bye.